They didn't even tell me. I found out our house was sold when I saw strangers unloading a U-Haul into what used to be my bedroom. It felt like the floor cracked open beneath me, not just metaphorically. I was standing on the driveway, suitcase in hand, staring at a little girl's Hello Kitty poster being pinned to the same window where my glow-in-the-dark stars used to be. That house was everything. I don't just mean it was my childhood home. I mean it was the only stable thing we did growing up. My parents weren't bad people, but financially responsible wasn't exactly a title they held with pride. So that house, it was my anchor. My roots. My inheritance. And now, someone else's minivan was in our garage, and there was a yellow Labrador barking behind the gate where I used to sneak out at midnight to meet my high school girlfriend. I called my mom. Straight to voicemail. I called Dad. Disconnected. No warning. No note. No goodbye. Just gone. And all I could think, standing there under that scorching August sun, was, why? Why would they sell the house? Why wouldn't they tell me? And how the hell did I not see this coming? Before I dive any deeper, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment if you've ever had your family pull the rug out from under you. I'm 28 now, and trust me, this story's not just about a house. It's about betrayal, survival, and taking back what should have never been stolen. By the way, I'm Aiden Park. I work in commercial architecture now, weirdly ironic, considering I couldn't even protect the one structure that mattered most to me. This all went down 2 years ago, right after I wrapped up a 3-month contract in South Korea. I'd come back home to California thinking I'd surprise my parents. Instead, I walked into the biggest betrayal of my life. And it was just getting started. I didn't move from the sidewalk for a solid 5 minutes. I just stood there, clutching my suitcase handle like it was the last thing tethering me to reality. Sweat was sliding down my spine, my t-shirt clinging to my back, but I barely noticed. My mind was spinning too fast. The woman who opened the front door had curly red hair and wore an oversized UC Berkeley hoodie, even though it was 90 degrees out. She looked at me like I was the intruder. Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious but not unfriendly. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I grew up in this house." She blinked. "Oh. You must be Aiden." I froze. "How do you know my name?" She gave a soft laugh. "The previous owners mentioned you. Said their son was away for work overseas and wouldn't be involved in the sale. They sounded sentimental about you." Sentimental? Is that what we call complete erasure now? I nodded numbly. Right. I didn't know it had sold. I thought, never mind. She stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, the hardwood creaking behind her. A breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and newly installed carpet, foreign smells and what should have been my sanctuary. "If you want, I can grab your old forwarding address. Your folks left some mail here for you." That word, forwarding, hit me like a gut punch. Everything had already been decided. Everything had already moved on. And I hadn't even known. She disappeared inside for a moment and returned with a small stack of mail bound by a rubber band. I recognized a few bank envelopes, some junk flyers, and one letter from my student loan provider. Great. I thanked her, barely, and dragged myself back to my rental car. I didn't even start the engine. I just sat there with my forehead pressed against the steering wheel, the AC blasting, trying not to scream. Where were my parents? Why would they do this without even texting me? I had funded part of that house's mortgage when Dad lost his job during the 2020 layoffs. I had paid for the new water heater. I'd even designed the backyard patio as my first ever side project in architecture school. That house wasn't just bricks and drywall. It was filled with us. With me. And now it was gone, sold out from under me like some outdated piece of furniture. I typed out a message to my mom. "Why didn't you tell me you sold the house?" But I didn't hit send. Because if she could vanish without a word, maybe she didn't deserve mine either. Still, I needed answers. What would you do if your parents sold your childhood home behind your back? Leave a comment, I'm serious, I want to know. Because the way I handled it? It wasn't perfect. But I wasn't about to just walk away. I checked the address on the forwarding label and plugged it into Google Maps. It was a one-bedroom condo in an over 55 community, 20 miles away. That didn't make sense. My parents were in their early 50s, nowhere near retirement. They'd always talked about upgrading someday, maybe getting a cabin up north or moving closer to the beach. But this? This screamed temporary. Or worse, desperate. I started driving. Every red light felt like a personal attack. I had this buzzing in my chest, like my ribs were vibrating from the inside. Part confusion, part rage, and a whole lot of fear. Because deep down, I already suspected something was very wrong. When I pulled up to the condo complex, I didn't even bother checking in at the gate. I waited for someone else's car to enter and tailgate through. Not exactly legal, but hey, I wasn't feeling particularly law-abiding in that moment. The place was eerily quiet. No kids. No music. Just wind brushing through sun-bleached hedges and the occasional flap of a screen door. Unit 14B looked lifeless. Curtains drawn. Porch light still on in the middle of the day. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Harder. Then I heard it, the scrape of furniture, a whisper, and then silence. Mom? I called out. Dad? It's Aiden. A pause. Then the door unlatched. Slowly, like a horror movie. And there she was, my mom. Except I barely recognized her. She'd lost weight. Her eyes were puffy. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Aiden, she breathed, and for a split second, I thought she'd cry. But then she just opened the door wider and stepped aside. Come in. The condo smelled like Lysol and something burnt. A half-eaten microwave meal sat on the counter. My dad was on the couch, watching the news with the volume so low it was just a mumble. He didn't look up. My mom sat down at the tiny dining table, motioned for me to do the same. I know you're angry, she began, voice trembling. But we had no choice. No choice? I wanted to slam my hands on the table. Instead, I pulled the chair out slowly and sat down, never taking my eyes off her. You sold my childhood home without telling me. You ghosted me for 3 months. And you say you had no choice? She flinched, like I'd struck her. Dad still hadn't looked over. We didn't mean for it to happen this way, she said quietly, eyes flickering to the laminate floor. The timing was complicated. I stared at her, waiting for something real. She glanced over her shoulder toward the living room. You know your father was let go. The severance ran out faster than we thought. We couldn't keep up with the mortgage. We tried to refinance, but I could have helped, I cut in. I've been working abroad nonstop for 2 years. You think I couldn't wire over a few months' payments? She shook her head. It wasn't just the mortgage. There were back taxes. Medical bills. The credit cards, my blood ran cold. What medical bills? Her voice cracked then. Your father had a stroke in February. A minor one, but it left him with some speech issues. He's not working anymore, Aiden. I looked over at him. His hand was resting on the remote, knuckles white. He still wouldn't meet my gaze. We thought we could handle it. But things got worse, fast. And the bank started making threats. We were this close to foreclosure. I dropped my gaze to the table. My throat felt like it was closing. This wasn't how I imagined coming home. I'd pictured hugs at the airport. Korean snacks spread out on the kitchen table. Maybe even a dumb welcome back. Banner taped to the fridge. Not this. Not desperation. Not secrets. But why didn't you tell me? I whispered. Why freeze me out? Because you've done enough for us, Aiden, she said. We were already ashamed you'd had to pitch in on the mortgage years ago. We didn't want to drag you down again. You finally built a life for yourself, I stood up. You thought lying would protect me? She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. We thought disappearing would hurt less than watching us drown. For a moment, I just stood there. Then I turned and walked out the front door without another word. The sun hit me like a hammer. I leaned against the car and closed my eyes. I didn't want to cry. I wanted to fix something. I wanted to fix everything. But all I had were more questions. If your parents went behind your back like this, would you forgive them? Would you try to rebuild, or would you walk away for good? Drop a comment below. I need to know I'm not the only one facing this kind of mess. Back in the car, I stared at the dashboard clock. 4:14 p.m. My flight had landed just that morning, and already my entire world was upside down. I reached into my bag, pulled out my work tablet, and opened the portfolio I'd been building. Projects, designs, floor plans, a whole life I'd been carving out of glass and steel. And for what? If I couldn't even protect the people I loved, what did all this mean? That night, I booked a hotel near our old neighborhood. I wasn't ready to go back to the condo. I wasn't ready to forgive. But I also wasn't ready to let that house go. Not yet. Something inside me had already made a decision I didn't fully understand. I was going to get it back. The next morning, I drove back to the house. Not to confront the new owners, I wasn't ready for that, but to look at it. Really look. It was like staring at a photo of someone you used to love, trying to find the pieces that still felt familiar. The roses Mom planted were gone. The porch swing had been replaced with a stainless steel bench that looked like it belonged outside a hospital. They'd painted the trim a sterile shade of gray that felt cold, surgical. But the bones of it, the house itself, still whispered to me. That's when I noticed something odd. Across the street, Mr. Goldstein, our neighbor for over 2 decades, was watering his lawn. He'd lost most of his hair and looked more hunched than I remembered, but I recognized his Boston Red Sox cap instantly. I crossed the street. Mr. Goldstein? He squinted at me, then grinned. Well, I'll be damned. Aiden Park, back from wherever the hell you vanished to. I smiled weakly. Good to see you. Bet you're here about the house. I paused. So, you know about what happened? He shook his head, lips pressed tight. I don't know all the details, but I'll tell you this: your parents were gone in the middle of the night. No goodbye, no moving truck, nothing. One day they were here, next day the house had a big sold sign and 2 realtors scraping the mailbox clean. My heart thumped. They didn't move anything out? Oh, sure. A van came 2 days later, but not a single photo left behind. No family albums. No furniture. It was like someone cleaned it out in a hurry. A chill ran down my spine. That didn't make sense. Did they say anything to you before they left? Any hint they were in trouble? He lowered the hose and looked around before leaning in. Look, I probably shouldn't say this, but your dad, he looked rough, son. Not just tired. Scared. And not the kind of scared you get from debt collectors. What kind then? He hesitated. The kind you get when someone's after you. I swallowed. What do you mean? He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. I saw a guy come by the house late one night, a few weeks before they disappeared. Black SUV, tinted windows. He didn't knock. Just waited outside for almost an hour before leaving. Came back 3 times. Never got out of the car. What did he look like? Didn't see much. But something about him made the hair on my neck stand up. I thanked him and walked back to my car, heart pounding. I thought this was about financial trouble. About shame. But now it felt bigger. Darker. Who was that man? And what did he want with my family? Have you ever had a moment when your entire understanding of a situation shattered and suddenly, nothing made sense anymore? That was me, standing in that driveway, realizing my parents might not just be broke, they might be hiding from someone. If you've been there, drop a comment. I need to know how you dealt with it. Back at the hotel, I couldn't sit still. I opened my laptop and started digging. County records, real estate listings, transaction history, anything I could get without setting off alarms. And then I found it. The house hadn't been sold through a traditional listing. It had been transferred. In cash. The name on the deed was a shell corporation based out of Nevada, Silver Pine Holdings LLC. No photos. No contact info. Just a faceless company that now owned the place I was born in. And worse. The transfer happened almost 2 weeks before I even landed back in the States. Which meant my parents had lied again. They'd been gone a lot longer than they told me. Why? Why run? Who the hell was behind that SUV? And what was I supposed to do with all of this? That night, sleep was a joke. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that Hello Kitty poster in the window, a mocking banner that screamed, "This isn't yours anymore." I tossed and turned in the stiff hotel sheets until 3:00 a.m., when frustration finally won over exhaustion. I needed someone to talk to. Someone who hadn't been lying to me. So I did something reckless. I texted Natalie. It had been almost 3 years since we spoke. My college ex. The last real relationship I'd had before I buried myself in work and left the country. We hadn't ended on great terms, mostly because I had a habit of disappearing into 14-hour design shifts and forgetting what day it was. But Natalie had always been close to my parents. Closer than most. She used to come over for Sunday dinners, help Mom fold laundry while they gossiped about neighbors. If anyone might have noticed something off before everything collapsed, it would be her. I kept the message short. Hey. I know it's been a while. It's Aiden. I'm back in town. My parents sold the house. Can we talk? I didn't expect a reply. She responded in less than 10 minutes. Meet me at Café Lucille at noon. You're buying. I almost laughed. Same old Natalie. By the time I got to the cafe the next day, the late morning sun had already turned the sidewalk into a frying pan. I spotted her instantly, sitting by the window, sunglasses perched on her head, iced coffee sweating in her hand. She looked good. More grown up. More solid. Wow, she said as I slid into the booth. You actually look like a real adult now. Did Korea turn you into a man? I cracked a smile. You mean the beard? I mean the haunted eyes and questionable fashion sense. But yeah, sure, the beard too. We talked for a few minutes, shallow stuff. Weather. Her new job in PR. The fact that our favorite taqueria had closed down. Then she leaned in, serious. So, what the hell happened to your parents? I was hoping you'd tell me, I said. They ghosted me. Sold the house without a word. Moved into some shady condo, and now I'm learning the buyer was a shell company. Her brows knit together. Silver Pine? I froze. How do you know that name? She took a slow sip of coffee. Because they tried to buy my dad's property last year. Cash. No appraisal. Just a cold email saying they wanted to help the community evolve. We thought it was a scam. My heart thudded. You didn't sell? God, no. My dad might be old school, but he's not dumb. He smelled something weird about it. Did some digging. Found out they've been quietly buying up old properties in this zip code for 2 years. Why? No idea. Half the places just sit empty. Some they rent out for double market rate. Others get flipped into these sterile Airbnb boxes. I sat back, thinking. This wasn't about my parents' financial problems. It was about location. Silver Pine Holdings wasn't just a faceless buyer. They were strategic, predatory, and my family had been caught in the net. If you've ever felt like the place you grew up was being erased piece by piece, you're not alone. Neighborhoods don't just change. Sometimes, they're bought out and sterilized. Drop a comment if your community's been affected by something like this. Look, Natalie said, her tone softer now. I don't know everything. But your parents loved that house. Your mom once told me she wanted you to inherit it someday. So if they sold it under the table, to a ghost company, that wasn't a choice. That was pressure. I stared at my untouched coffee. You think they were forced? I think they were scared. And if you dig deeper, you'll find out why. Her phone buzzed and she checked it. I've gotta run. But Aiden? I looked up. Don't do anything stupid. If this company's what I think it is, you're playing with fire. I nodded, but the truth was already pulsing in my veins like electricity. I was already in it. Too deep to walk away. And if Silver Pine had taken my home? Then I was going to take it back. Whatever it cost. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the hotel room with the curtains drawn, the glow of my laptop screen the only light I needed. A blank page stared back at me, and then I began mapping. Names. Properties. Transfer dates. Patterns. Silver Pine Holdings had scooped up 17 properties in the last 14 months, all within a 5-mile radius of my old neighborhood. Some had been flipped and sold within weeks. Others, like ours, were still under renovation or occupied by quiet tenants no one could identify. The paper trail was murky, exactly what you'd expect from a company hiding behind layers of LLCs and out-of-state incorporations. But the names of the realtors involved in the sale kept repeating. And one of them stood out, Marcus Wells. That name hit me like a cold wind. Back in high school, Marcus had been a local property manager. The kind of slick-talking guy who made his living flipping cheap duplexes and turning them into overpriced rentals. He wasn't a criminal, not exactly, but everyone knew he played in the gray zone of legality. And now, it looked like he'd leveled up. I jotted his name down and kept digging. That's when I found it. An old local newspaper article from 2 years ago, back when the housing market had gone crazy. Headline: New development group promises to revitalize historic Eastwood. Silver Pine Holdings. Marcus Wells quoted directly. He'd claimed they wanted to protect neighborhoods from decay and offer modern, affordable housing options to transitioning families. It was such corporate garbage I almost laughed. But what really caught my attention was the city permit filed 6 months before that, a demolition request for an apartment block that never ended up getting torn down. Reason for the cancellation? Community legal resistance. I clicked through and found the name of the attorney who filed the injunction, Natalie's firm. So she did no more than she let on. Ever realize your past relationships still hold keys to your present problems? Turns out the people you leave behind sometimes hold the exact thread you need to unravel the mystery ahead. If you've experienced that, comment below. This story's not just about me. It's about how we rebuild the bridges we burned. I called her. Did you know your firm went head-to-head with Silver Pine last year? A pause. Yeah. But I wasn't involved in that case. You still have access to the files? Another pause. Why? Because I need to know what they're hiding. If I can find anything illegal or shady, I can challenge the sale. Maybe even buy it back under forced divestment. Slow down, she said. Even if you do find something, that doesn't mean the court will give it back to you. That house is gone, Aiden. Owned. Occupied. I don't care, I said. If I can prove coercion, or show the sale violated any conditions, I can tie it up legally. At the very least, I can make it unprofitable for them to keep. She was quiet. Then, I'll look. But promise me something. What? If you find out your parents were involved in something dangerous, something criminal, you'll stop. No revenge crusade. No hero complex. Just walk away. I didn't answer. Because I couldn't promise that. Later that night, she sent me an encrypted folder of documents from the prior case. Permits, notes, screenshots of harassment complaints by tenants, and a blurry scanned email that had been flagged by the firm's investigator. It was addressed to Marcus Wells, from someone labeled MS Operations, Internal. Subject line, move quickly. Priority properties flagged. Especially the Park residence. I stared at that line for a long time. Park residence. My house. It hadn't just been swept up in a bulk deal. It had been targeted. Suddenly the memory of that SUV outside our house didn't seem random at all. There was something about my family. Something about that property. And whatever it was, I was going to find it. Don't forget to subscribe if you're following this. I've only scratched the surface. There's a reason they wanted my home. And the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous this got. Stay with me. That night, as I closed my laptop, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. It was thin. Fragile. But it was a start. I was going to buy the house back. Even if I had to tear Silver Pine down to do it. 2 days later, I walked into the glass and steel office of Wells Realty Group, and it felt like stepping into enemy territory. Everything screamed money, from the imported bamboo flooring to the brushed brass nameplates that lined the hallway. But to me, it just looked like someone tried to buy legitimacy with surface polish. At the reception desk, a woman in her mid-20s gave me a bright, scripted smile. Welcome to Wells Realty. Do you have an appointment? I leaned forward, voice steady. Tell Marcus Wells that Aiden Park is here. I'll wait. Her smile faltered slightly. Let me check if he's available. She disappeared through a side door. 2 minutes later, she returned with a tight expression. Mr. Wells says he has 10 minutes. Conference room B. As I walked down the hallway, I passed framed news clippings of his supposed successes, articles from real estate magazines praising his urban revitalization efforts. It made me sick. Marcus Wells hadn't changed much since I'd last seen him, maybe a little heavier, hair grayer at the temples, but the smirk? Still there. Still smug. Still the look of a man who thought he was untouchable. He stood as I entered. Aiden Park. Been a long time. I didn't shake his hand. Cut the pleasantries. I'm here about my parents' house. He motioned for me to sit. I figured you'd show up eventually. Have a seat. I stayed standing. You bought it under a shell company. Cash. No market listing. Why? He raised an eyebrow. We made them an offer. They accepted. It's legal. Did you pressure them? Threaten them? Send someone in a black SUV to watch the house? His smile faltered. Just for a second. That's quite the accusation. I stepped closer. You specifically flagged our property as priority. Why? What did you want from that lot? He stood now too. Look, kid, don't call me that. He smirked. Fine. Mr. Park. You clearly don't understand how real estate works. This wasn't personal. It's strategic. Your neighborhood's undergoing rezoning in the next 18 months. That land is going to be worth triple what we paid. We saw opportunity. Your folks saw a way out. You exploited them. No. We offered a solution. They were in over their heads, bills, medical debt, and let's be honest, a bit of pride. We didn't make them sign. They asked for the papers. I stared at him. I'm going to buy it back. He laughed. Actually laughed. You? With what? That architect's salary? I've got equity. I've got clients. And I've got evidence. He folded his arms. If you want to file a complaint, be my guest. But unless you've got proof of coercion or fraud, that house is ours. Legally, cleanly, and permanently. Ever talk to someone so slimy, you felt like you needed a shower afterward? That was Marcus. Every sentence out of his mouth felt like it was dipped in gasoline, waiting for someone to light the match. If you've had to face someone like this, drop a comment. I want to know how you kept your cool. I'm not backing off, I said. Not until I find out why you wanted that house so badly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then maybe you should start asking your parents what they were hiding, Aiden. Because trust me, this doesn't end the way you think it does. I left the office with my pulse in my ears, my hands balled into fists. I wanted to punch something, anything, but I also knew I'd struck a nerve. Marcus knew something. And it had nothing to do with real estate. I didn't go back to the hotel. I drove. 4 hours. Down streets I hadn't seen since high school. Past old gas stations now turned into chain coffee shops. Through neighborhoods that used to be lively and diverse and now felt like a Pinterest board of beige condos and designer dogs. I ended up in a grocery store parking lot, staring blankly through the windshield, parked between a Range Rover and a Tesla. All I could hear in my head was Marcus's voice. Maybe you should start asking your parents what they were hiding. That's what gutted me the most. Because deep down, I'd already started to wonder the same. Back at the condo, their sad, temporary little box of a home, I found Dad sitting in the armchair by the window, watching the afternoon sky like it owed him something. Mom was folding laundry on the couch, the TV off, her posture rigid when I walked in. Where were you? She asked. I went to see Marcus Wells. She dropped the shirt she was folding. You what? I wanted answers. I wanted to know why a real estate group would go after our house specifically. Dad still hadn't looked at me. His jaw clenched, and I realized he knew. He'd known all along. I turned to him. Dad? Nothing. Dad. Look at me. He finally did. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't defiance. It was shame. I need to know the truth, I said, voice low. Please. He looked at Mom, then back at me. The house was never just ours. I frowned. What does that mean? Mom sat down, her hands trembling. When you were little, just after your 7th birthday, we took out a second mortgage. We were already struggling. But your dad had a friend, someone who offered to help. Help how? Off the books, she said. Cash. No questions asked. But there were strings. Always strings. Dad spoke now, slowly, like each word weighed 50 pounds. His name was Min Suk. My breath caught. Wait, the Korean investor? The one who ran that construction business back in the early 2000s? Dad nodded. I thought he disappeared after the housing crash. He didn't disappear, Mom whispered. He just changed names. He's the one behind Silver Pine. Everything tilted. The ground beneath me felt wrong. You borrowed from him? We didn't know what he'd become, she said quickly. Back then, he was just a community guy with money. But when things went south, and we couldn't pay the loan, he made us sign over lien rights on the house. We thought it expired. We thought we were safe. You thought, I repeated, barely able to keep the tremor out of my voice. Dad looked at me, eyes rimmed red. He called in the debt, Aiden. That's why we sold. He gave us one option, sell it quietly to one of his shell companies, or he'd seize it and sue. And we couldn't afford that. We were already drowning. Ever uncover a family secret that rewrote your entire history? It's like finding out your house had termites for 20 years, and you'd been sleeping in it the whole time. If that's ever happened to you, leave a comment, I want to hear your story too. I sat down hard on the edge of the coffee table. My family hadn't just lost our house. We'd lost control of our legacy to a man they trusted, a man who'd become something dangerous. That night, I sat in my hotel room and stared at the ceiling for hours. I'd come back thinking I was just dealing with betrayal. But this? This was a full-blown war with a man who'd been embedded in my family's life for decades. A man who played the long game. And somehow, I had to beat him. Not just for me. For them. For everything we lost and everything they tried to protect me from. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I didn't even need an alarm. My mind had been grinding all night, looping through every detail like a blueprint etched into my skull. This wasn't just about reclaiming a property anymore. This was about taking back control. From a man who had preyed on my parents' desperation and erased my entire childhood in one calculated move. And if Min Suk, or whatever he called himself now, wanted a war? He'd picked the wrong architect. I started with a call to Natalie. Remember when you told me not to do anything reckless? A pause. Then, oh God. What did you do? Nothing yet, I said. But I'm going to fight this. I need your help. She sighed on the other end, but it wasn't the frustrated kind. It was the kind people make when they've already decided to jump in with you. What's the plan? I want to hit Silver Pine where it hurts. The city's rezoning applications. Their property liens. Their records. Anything we can find that shows fraud, coercion, or misuse of authority. You think they left a trail? Guys like Min Suk always do. They get cocky. Eventually, they file the wrong form or strong-arm the wrong person. She hesitated. You'll need more than paperwork to win this. I know, I said. That's why I'm going to find him. You're what? I want to look him in the eye. Not Marcus. Not one of his suits. Him. I want to ask him what he really wants and what it'll cost to take my home back. You really think he'll talk to you? I think he'll want to gloat. Men like him can't resist. Silence. Then, all right. I'll see what I can dig up. Here's the thing about pushing back against people with power, they always assume you're going to roll over. They don't expect you to learn the system they manipulate. They don't expect you to fight fire with precision. If you've ever had to go up against someone who underestimated you, tell me in the comments. I'm about to show this guy who he's messing with. I spent the rest of the day chasing leads. I called in every favor I could, professors, contractors, even an old mentor from a design firm in LA who'd done zoning consultation work. Slowly, I began piecing together a map of Silver Pine's holdings and influence. That's when I uncovered something massive. 3 properties acquired by Silver Pine in the past year were part of historic zoning protection applications, meaning the city had flagged them as potential cultural landmarks. Which meant any sale, especially under pressure or without preservation approval, violated local ordinance. One of them? My parents' house. 22 years ago, my mother had submitted the house for historic consideration due to its architectural integrity and its location on land tied to one of the original Korean-American immigrant routes in the state. The application had been delayed, then forgotten. But legally? It was still open. If I could reopen the historic landmark review, Silver Pine wouldn't be able to tear it down. And they sure as hell couldn't flip it. It wouldn't give the house back to me, not yet. But it would freeze any major changes and force the city to look at the sale. Momentum. Finally. I grabbed my keys. I was going to City Hall. City Hall smelled like dry paper, stress, and 40-year-old air conditioning. I marched past the directory, up the stairs, and into the Preservation and Landmark office on the 3rd floor, a bland suite of cubicles and steel filing cabinets that hadn't seen a facelift since 1996. The receptionist, a thin man in a mustard-colored cardigan, barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. Can I help you? I need to reopen a historic preservation case. It was filed by Yun Park. Address, 1325 Brookway. He blinked. You're her son, I said. I have identification. I'm listed as her heir. He didn't argue. Just typed sluggishly into his terminal, clicked a few times, then squinted at the screen. Ha! What? Looks like the file's been touched. Recently. My pulse skipped. By who? He scrolled again. Request for archive access filed, 2 weeks ago. Approved by external party, SP Holdings Republic M. Wells. Marcus again. I leaned over the counter. Did he remove anything? No. But he requested a copy of the original submission and a copy of the assessor's report from 2003. I knew that report. I'd seen it once in high school. It talked about the structural lineage of our home. How the framework matched a rare 1940s Korean post-war bungalow style, imported from a limited LA blueprint. But why would Marcus care about that? Unless. I turned back to the receptionist. Can I see the original application? He sighed and got up, disappearing into a back room. 10 minutes later, he returned with a box labeled #HP4479, Brookway Residence. I sat at the side table and started flipping through it. Blueprints. Photos of the original woodwork. My mom's neat handwriting describing the cultural importance of the home's placement and how it mirrored a migration pattern from Koreatown's early expansion. Then, something I'd never seen before. A hand-drawn family tree, clipped to the back of the folder. At the top, Min Suk Park. I stared. Then read the note attached in my mother's handwriting. Min Suk was your grandfather's cousin. He came to the U.S. in 1969 under an alias to avoid conscription in South Korea. He helped build this house in 1972 with your great-uncle. He has no legal claim, but he threatened our family in 1998 over the land. We never reported it, hoping it would end there. My fingers went cold. Min Suk wasn't just a lone shark. He was family. And that changed everything. Betrayal from a stranger is one thing. Betrayal from blood? That's a scar that carves deeper than bone. If your family has ever kept secrets this big, or if you've ever found out the villain of your story wore your last name, leave a comment. I want to know how you survived it. I copied every page, thanked the receptionist, and left. By the time I got outside, my head was buzzing. The reason Min Suk had targeted our house so precisely wasn't just strategy. It was legacy. He saw the property not as real estate, but as a trophy. Proof of control. Dominance. Ownership over a bloodline he'd broken off from decades ago. But he didn't count on me coming back. He didn't count on me knowing the full story. And now that I had this, I wasn't just fighting for bricks and beams anymore. I was fighting for the soul of my family. And I would win. Even if it meant tearing apart everything I thought I knew about where I came from. By the time I got back to the hotel, my hands were shaking with adrenaline. I laid out the documents like a battle map. Copies of my mom's original preservation filing, the genealogical note connecting Min Suk to our family, the scanned city log showing Marcus accessing the file. I even had the assessor's commentary, noting that any structural modification without cultural review could void the title transfer. It was enough to stall them. Maybe even crack the door open to reverse the sale. I called Natalie again. Meet me. Urgent. We met at her office this time. A tall glass tower downtown where everything smelled like coffee, toner, and looming lawsuits. She buzzed me in and led me to a private conference room. I dumped the files onto the table. Silver Pine never should have been able to buy our house. The cultural landmark status was pending. They accessed the records before the sale, that's tampering. And there's more. She picked up the family tree. Her eyes scanned the lines, the scribbled handwriting at the top. Her brows slowly lifted. Wait. Min Suk's your relative? My grandfather's cousin. Ex-military fugitive. Immigrant ghost. And apparently, the reason we lost everything. She stared at me, eyes flickering with something between shock and recognition. That name showed up in the injunction files last year. But no one connected him to your family. Now we can. She leaned back, folding her arms. If we file this, it's war. Silver Pine won't just threaten you, they'll try to bury you in court fees. Or worse. I'm not scared of lawsuits. She hesitated. I wasn't talking about lawsuits. The air between us grew still. And that's when I knew Natalie had seen more than she'd admitted. How bad is it? I asked. She ran a hand through her hair. 2 months ago, a tenant on a Silver Pine-owned property got served with a false eviction notice. The guy refused to leave. 2 days later, his car caught fire. No investigation. Are you saying they're threatening people? I'm saying their tactics go beyond legal. When you step into the ring with people who rewrite the rules, you learn fast that logic doesn't matter, leverage does. If you've ever stood up to something corrupt, especially when it meant risking more than your reputation, leave a comment. These stories matter. I nodded. Good. Then it's time we go public. Natalie blinked. Excuse me? We leaked the family tree, the preservation file, the city's failure to block the sale. Not in court. In the press. That's insane. It's exposure, I said. They've kept power by operating in the shadows. Let's drag them into the light. She looked at me like I just suggested setting a building on fire, and then, slowly, she smiled. You really haven't changed, she muttered. I grinned. Thanks. Wasn't a compliment. She opened her laptop, pulled up a contact list. There's a reporter I trust. She's covered housing fraud for years. If we show her what you've got, and she smells even a hint of scandal, she'll run it. Perfect, I said. Let's give Silver Pine a story they can't bury. What I didn't expect was how fast they'd retaliate. Less than 24 hours later, my hotel room was broken into. They didn't steal anything. They didn't need to. They left one thing on the bed, a burned copy of my childhood house key. And a note. Some things aren't worth digging up. Leave it buried. I stared at the key on the bed. It was identical to the one I used to carry on a frayed Spider-Man keychain in middle school, same worn edges, same slight bend in the shaft from years of slamming it into the back door lock. But this one had been scorched. Burned black on one side, as if someone had held it to a flame just long enough to warp the metal without melting it. And then there was the note. Some things aren't worth digging up. Leave it buried. There was no signature. No fingerprint. No traceable paper. Just a message. One meant for me. They didn't break in to steal. They came to send a warning. My stomach turned. Not out of fear for myself, but for Natalie. For my parents. For anyone who was now caught in the path of this storm I'd stirred up. I grabbed my phone and called Natalie. It rang once. Then twice. Then voicemail. I cursed out loud and bolted out the door. She wasn't answering her work line, and when I got to her office 20 minutes later, the receptionist gave me a nervous look. She left early. Said something came up. Didn't say what. I checked my messages. Nothing. Called again. Straight to voicemail. I drove to her apartment. A modest, quiet complex near the university. No car in the lot. No lights in her window. Just silence. I didn't even realize I was shaking until I got out of the car and felt the tremor in my legs. I stood there, in the parking lot, heart thudding. And for the first time since I came back to California, I was scared. It's easy to think you're brave until someone you care about becomes collateral. Suddenly, justice feels a lot more expensive. Have you ever had to choose between what's right and what's safe? Tell me how you handled it. I'm still trying to figure out if I made the right call. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, waiting for any sign of her. Eventually, I drove back to the hotel. There were no cops waiting for me. No second message. Just the same scorched key on the bed and my own thoughts clawing at the walls of my skull. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. My phone finally buzzed at 2:13 a.m. Natalie, I'm okay. Had to lay low. You need to stop pushing. This is bigger than property. It's organized. I stared at the screen. Organized. Not just shady. Not just unethical. Criminal. I replied, we're already in this. I'm not backing down. Not unless you tell me to walk away for your sake. Her reply came 2 minutes later, I'm not scared of them. Just don't do anything without me. I smiled, weakly. Not because anything was okay. But because, despite everything, I wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel, took everything I hadn't already backed up digitally, and moved into a short-term rental under a different name. No front desk. No lobby. Just a keypad on a door and a place to think. If Silver Pine wanted to play dirty, fine. But I was done playing defense. Now. It was my turn to move. 3 days later, I stood in front of a mic under the bright, flickering lights of the Eastwood Neighborhood Preservation Board's monthly meeting. Half the chairs were filled with older residents in windbreakers and sensible shoes, people who'd been watching their neighbors vanish for years without understanding why. But the other half? Journalists. Young families. Former tenants. And one face that stood out more than any, Natalie, in a black blazer, holding a manila folder like it was a sword. I hadn't told my parents I was doing this. Not yet. Because I knew they'd try to stop me. But this wasn't about them anymore. This was about a community being carved up and sold off. It was about the kids who used to ride bikes past my old house, now replaced by out-of-state landlords in corporate mailboxes. And it was about a man named Min Suk Park who built his empire off the back of a lie. I tapped the mic, cleared my throat. My name is Aiden Park. 2 months ago, I came home from working abroad to find my family's house, the house we lived in for 26 years. Sold to a corporate entity behind a shell company. No warning. No notice. Just, gone. Murmurs spread across the room. But that's not the real story, I said. The real story is how that company, Silver Pine Holdings, targeted culturally significant properties in Eastwood using insider information, unpaid family debts, and intimidation. And mine? Mine was personal. I held up a scanned copy of the family tree. This man, Min Suk Park, is both the silent owner of Silver Pine and my great-uncle. My parents borrowed from him during a financial crisis. When they couldn't pay, he used it as leverage to force a sale. But what he didn't count on is that the property was already under cultural landmark review, a process that should have blocked the transaction entirely. Now the room was dead silent. Silver Pine has exploited dozens of families under the guise of redevelopment. But I have documents showing their agents accessed confidential city records before purchases. I have evidence of property tampering, intimidation, and undeclared conflicts of interest. I looked directly at the board chair. And I'm not just here to get my house back. I'm here to ask for a moratorium on all Silver Pine acquisitions in Eastwood pending a formal investigation. I'm asking you to freeze them out and give this neighborhood a chance to breathe again. There's a moment in every fight where fear turns into clarity. Where you stop asking can I win, and start asking what happens if I don't fight at all? If you've ever felt that shift, tell me about it in the comments. That shift changed everything for me. When I finished, there was silence. Then, slowly, applause. First from a woman in the third row, clapping with careful pride. Then the couple next to her. Then more. Within seconds, the room was thunder. And for the first time since stepping off that plane, I didn't feel like a stranger in my hometown. I felt like someone home. Natalie came up after the meeting, handed me the folder. Media picked it up. 3 outlets so far. The city council will see it by morning. What about Marcus? He's already spinning. But the internal files you submitted? That family tree? That's dynamite. I exhaled hard. It wasn't a victory, not yet. But it was traction. And Min Suk? He was going to feel it. Because his empire wasn't built on concrete. It was built on paper. On loopholes. On fear. And now, I was tearing page after page out of his playbook. The next 48 hours were a blur of phone calls, document scans, Google Drive folders, press interviews, and city planning jargon that turned my brain into paste. But somehow, through the chaos, we started to see results. The Eastwood Neighborhood Board voted 5-2 to grant an emergency 60-day freeze on all Silver Pine Holdings demolition permits. That meant they couldn't touch a single structure until a legal review was completed. That meant my house was safe for now. But this wasn't just about the freeze. This was about momentum. Natalie worked her magic from the legal end, filing a motion to re-examine historical property protections on behalf of my parents, leveraging the city's own incomplete documentation process to demand an investigation. It wasn't a lawsuit yet. But it was a spark. And Silver Pine noticed. By the end of the second day, they launched a media blitz. Sponsored articles popped up online overnight. Community revitalizers face unfair opposition. Why Eastwood needs innovation, not nostalgia's Silver Pine CEO breaks silence. We're not the enemy. The last one made me laugh. The CEO in question? A shell name, a paid actor, not even real leadership. We countered fast. Natalie's journalist contact dropped a bombshell piece, Paper Empire, the secret ties between Silver Pine Holdings and Eastwood's forgotten families. Front page. Within hours, the city council opened a formal ethics review. People started talking. Online. On the street. At cafes. Even my dad's old friend from church called him and said, "Is it true? Your kid's taking on Silver Pine? Tell him I'm behind him." But all victories have shadows. And this one brought a bigger one than ever. Around 10 p.m. that night, I got a call. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened. Just 6 words, "You're not ready for this war." No background noise. No caller ID. Just the voice, deep, calm, rehearsed. I froze. Natalie was sitting across from me in the Airbnb, laptop on her knees, spreadsheets open on the floor. I hit replay. She listened. Didn't flinch. "Still think this isn't organized crime?" she asked quietly. I stood up, heart pounding. "They're trying to scare me." "They should be scared of you. You ever notice how threats only work when you're alone? When you've got people beside you, friends, allies, the truth. Their power shrinks. If you've ever stood your ground while someone tried to make you back down, drop a comment. These stories teach us how to keep standing. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up with Natalie, planning the next strike. We made 3 lists, legal angles, everything we could file, freeze, or flag. Media pushes, stories that still hadn't been told, forced elderly evictions, underreported property flips, city code violations. Personal pressure points, allies we could turn. City officials. Former employees. Architects. Inspectors. We were building a case not just in court, but in public opinion. Because we both knew something hard and ugly, even if you have truth on your side, the real fight is getting people to care. And for the first time, they did. Still, every hour that passed made the stakes clearer. If I wanted to win this war, I couldn't just expose Silver Pine. I had to outlast them. By week's end, Natalie and I were running on caffeine, adrenaline, and blind rage. We'd built a full case brief, 42 pages of documents, timestamped emails, transcripts, property maps, tax discrepancies, and a full timeline of how Silver Pine had gained control over our house and more than a dozen others using undisclosed familial leverage, unregistered shell companies, and unauthorized access to preservation files. Still, it wasn't enough. Because the board could stall. The media cycle could shift. And Min Suk? He hadn't shown his face. I was still chasing a ghost. Until Friday morning, when the ghost slipped. Natalie forwarded me an email chain she'd gotten from a whistleblower. It was anonymous. Untraceable. But real. A construction permit filed under one of Silver Pine's holding companies, not for renovation, but for full demolition of my family home. Filed 2 days after the emergency freeze went into effect. A violation of city order. A direct act of contempt. I stared at the document. They were going to do it anyway. Natalie nodded grimly. They filed under a secondary shell. Different contractor, different address formatting. They were hoping it would slip through automated review. I gritted my teeth. So they think the rules don't apply. They never did. Not to people like Min Suk. That's when I saw it, a name buried at the bottom of the form. Project Inspector, D.R. Kwan. I blinked. Wait. I know that name. I rummaged through the scanned files from my mom's original preservation application, and there it was, in faded ink from 2003. Preservation Consultant, Deborah Ree Kwan. Same initials. Same person. She'd worked on the original file. And now, she was assigned to approve its destruction. My fingers flew across the keyboard. 10 minutes later, I had her LinkedIn profile open. Former city assessor. Now freelance permit consultant. Still lived in the Bay Area. And judging by her recent post about rescuing architectural integrity in a world of corporate abuse, she might not be thrilled about her name being used in a fraudulent demolition scheme. I emailed her directly. 2 hours later, she replied. Meet me at Westfield Plaza. Parking level 3. Bring everything. Natalie looked at me. This is it. If she's on our side, we can bury them. Life doesn't hand you moments like this. You build them word by word, hour by hour, failure by failure. And when they finally show up, they don't look like miracles. They look like parking garages and folding chairs and too much coffee. If you've ever had to claw your way toward a turning point, drop a comment. I want to hear what it took to get there. We drove across town. No entourage. No fanfare. Just a woman in her early 60s, in a clean gray trench coat, standing by a concrete column with a canvas tote bag and eyes sharp enough to cut steel. You're Yin Park's son, she asked. I nodded. She was brave. Filing that application. I told her not to bother. Said the board would never care about a Korean home on a quiet street. You were wrong, I said gently. She smiled. Glad to hear it. We showed her the permit. The forged timestamp. The illegal shell company. Her face tightened. They used my name, she muttered. They forged my credentials. This permit? It's not just illegal, it's grounds for criminal charges. Will you testify? She didn't hesitate. Yes. I've waited 20 years to see someone challenge these bastards. And just like that, we had our inside witness. Silver Pine had tried to wipe my house off the map. But they'd left fingerprints. And now, we were going to use them to bring everything crashing down. That night, the three of us, me, Natalie, and Deborah, sat in the Airbnb's cramped kitchen, eating cold noodles and hunched over a laptop like revolutionaries plotting to storm the gates. Deborah had brought more than her testimony. She brought records. Dozens of city files, backup logs, staff memos she'd archived over the years. Some of them were yellowed and wrinkled, others scanned, some still in legal folders with rusting staples. What they revealed was stunning. Silver Pine had been influencing permit approvals for over a decade, greasing the wheels through a rotating network of mid-level consultants who'd rubber stamp any demolition request so long as it was paid in cash or diverted through expedited pathways. In 3 cases, the company had filed retroactive permits after the buildings were already gone, erasing history, then faking the paperwork to make it look clean. This, Deborah said, tapping the files, is not just a scandal. This is conspiracy. I looked at Natalie. She nodded. We leak it. She sent it all, every file, every signature, every timestamp, to her contact at the local investigative outlet. Within 2 hours, the editor called back with 3 words: "We're running it." It was finally happening. The story would break Monday morning. I should have felt relief. But something hung heavy in the air, like the silence before a storm. Natalie seemed to sense it too. She stayed late, sitting with me on the couch as the laptop glowed in the corner. "You okay?" she asked. I looked at her. The woman who'd helped me drag my past into the light. Who had risked her name, her job, even her safety, just to help me reclaim something no bank account could measure. "I'm scared," I admitted. Not of being wrong, but of what happens if I'm right. Because what if they didn't care? What if the city board ignored it? What if Min-suk didn't retreat but came back harder? Natalie touched my hand. "You're not alone, Aiden." And she meant it. But that night, something inside me cracked wide open. Not from fear. From clarity. There's a point in every story where the fight stops being about revenge and starts being about who you are without what they took from you. If you've ever had to define yourself after losing everything, I get it now. Leave a comment. I'll read every word. I couldn't sleep. And I wasn't surprised when, at 3:34 a.m., someone knocked on the door. 3 times. Not loud. Not urgent. But expectant. I looked through the peephole. An older man in a black wool coat. Sunglasses, despite the hour. Hands folded in front of him. I opened the door. He didn't flinch. Just said, "You've made quite the mess." "Min-suk." He nodded, as if greeting an old friend. I didn't invite him in. But I didn't close the door either. "What do you want?" I asked. "To stop you from destroying your future." I folded my arms. "You stole my past. Seems fair." He didn't smile. "You think you've won something. But exposing me? Exposing Silver Pine? That doesn't bring your house back." "No," I said. "But it stops you from taking anyone else's." He tilted his head. "You'd burn the village just to save one home." "No," I said. "I'd burn your empire to the ground to save what it stood for." His eyes narrowed. "You publish this, and the people who come next won't be me. They won't knock." I stared back. "Then they'll find someone who's already waiting." He didn't speak again. He just turned and walked down the corridor, into the darkness. I closed the door, locked it, and turned to Natalie, who was now wide awake and standing beside the couch. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. Because I was done being afraid. The article dropped at 8:03 a.m. The company that sold your neighborhood, inside Silver Pine's quiet war on Eastwood. Front page. Full spread. My name was in the headline. My face, from a photo I didn't even know they'd taken, stared back at me from every major blog and feed by mid-morning. By noon, I was getting texts from people I hadn't spoken to in 10 years. "You really did this? I always wondered what happened to your family. Are you safe? Proud of you, man." Natalie's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The city issued a formal response within hours, launching a multi-department audit of Silver Pine Holdings, suspending all pending demolitions tied to their entities statewide. The media outlets began connecting dots across cities, tracing the company's influence in other neighborhoods, some even as far as Oregon and Nevada. And then, the subpoenas started rolling in. Emails, contracts, permits. Marcus Wells was forced to resign that same day, citing health issues. And Deborah? She was invited to testify publicly before the city's Historic Property Review Council. It was the start of a reckoning. But amidst the storm, something unexpected happened. My parents called me. Not just a text. Not an email. An actual call. I stared at the screen when it lit up, Mom's cell. I picked up. She was crying before I even said hello. I read the article, she choked out. You did all this? Yeah, I said quietly. I had to. We thought we ruined everything, she said. We were so ashamed. We didn't think we could fight back, Aiden. We thought that man still owned us. My voice cracked. He doesn't. Not anymore. Then Dad got on the line. He didn't say much. Just this, I'm proud of you. 6 words. But they hit harder than anything Silver Pine had ever thrown at me. If you've ever had a parent say they're proud after years of silence, you know it doesn't feel like a compliment. It feels like air after drowning. If that's ever been your experience, I hope you'll share it below. These moments matter more than we admit. That evening, I walked to the edge of the Eastwood district. To the last block Silver Pine had tried to buy but failed. A mural covered the side of a corner store, a painting of a young girl in a school uniform holding a red kite, her other hand extended toward a faded traditional home behind her. Someone had spray-painted the words underneath in white, "History is not for sale." I smiled. Because they weren't just fighting for my home anymore. They were fighting for the soul of the neighborhood. And somehow, we'd woken them up. But as I turned the corner, a black car pulled into view at the far end of the block. Not speeding. Just sitting there. Watching. The black car idled at the far end of the block. Tires barely moving. Engine quiet. It didn't belong there. I knew every local vehicle like I knew the lines on my own hands. I stopped walking. Let it sit. Waited. And just when I thought I might have been overreacting, that maybe it was just a delivery van or a rideshare driver waiting on a passenger. The window rolled down. A man leaned out. Not Min Suk. Someone younger. Mid-30s. Dressed like security, not corporate. He didn't wave. Didn't call out. Just stared. Then he raised a camera and snapped my photo. That was it. No threat. No move. Just a silent, calculated message. I raised my phone and took a picture right back. He didn't flinch. Then the car rolled forward, turned the corner, and disappeared. Natalie met me back at the rental an hour later. I showed her the photo. She didn't even blink. They're documenting us now, she said. Trying to create leverage. Or intimidation. She nodded. But we've already won the court of public opinion. They can't spin it now. Every move they make just looks worse. That night, the news ran another story, Silver Pine CEO under investigation for multi-state real estate fraud. A federal agency had stepped in. Marcus was subpoenaed. A warrant issued for a broader forensic audit. But the part that mattered most? The city had officially reopened the historic preservation application for 1325 Brookway. My family's home. The new owners, the couple with the Hello Kitty poster and the Labrador, were offered a buyout, facilitated by the city, so that the property could be entered into public preservation. And they took it. The email hit my inbox like a thunderclap. 1325 Brookway is available for repurchase at original sale value plus adjusted holding costs. You have right of first offer as descendant of property originator. I just stared at the screen. Natalie leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "You going to do it?" I nodded. But not for the reasons I thought. Not for revenge. Not to rewrite history. I was going to buy it back, to protect it. Because I'd finally learned that home isn't about ownership. It's about legacy. Have you ever had to reclaim something that never should have been taken from you? Not just with money, but with time, and grit, and everything you are? I bought my house back. But the real win? Was that I'm no longer afraid of losing it again? Because now, I know who I am without it. And that's the person who deserved it all along. 2 weeks later, I walked through the front door. No moving truck. No cameras. Just me. The air smelled different, but the bones were the same. The floors creaked like I remembered. The corner by the stairs still had the notch where I tripped on my 10th birthday and cracked the plaster. I ran my hand along the wall and whispered, "We're home." Natalie joined me a few minutes later. She brought takeout. We sat on the empty floor in the living room, surrounded by shadows and echoes. "What now?" she asked. I looked around the bare walls, the empty kitchen, the quiet. "Now," I said, "we rebuild. One memory at a time." I didn't move back in right away. For a few days, I just visited. Early mornings before sunrise. Late nights, long after the city went quiet. I'd bring a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and sit on the back porch where the patio stones I'd laid in college still peeked through the overgrown grass. Funny, back then, I thought they looked uneven. Like I'd botched the alignment. Now, I saw character. Imperfection. Story. Everything here held one. The scratch by the front door from the time we locked ourselves out and Dad tried to pick the lock with a fork. The half-painted baseboard in the upstairs hallway. The product of a home improvement project that ran out of steam and patience in 2008. Even the attic hatch, still squeaky and stubborn, like it resented being opened. It was all still here. And yet, nothing was the same. Not because the house had changed. But because I had. Coming home isn't about geography. It's not about walls or rooflines. It's about who you are when you stand in the place that raised you and how you choose to carry that forward. If you've ever come back different than when you left, I'd love to hear what that return felt like. Drop a comment. You're not alone. The neighborhood had changed, too, but not in the way I feared. People had rallied. There were flyers posted outside the local library now, "Know your rights. Learn how to protect your home." A Facebook group had formed, Eastwood Residents Against Predatory Acquisition. Natalie even got invited to speak at a local housing conference, her first public talk in years. We weren't just cleaning up one mess. We were building a blueprint, one that other neighborhoods could follow. As for my parents? They came by one Saturday afternoon. They brought lumpia and a folding card table, and we ate in the garage, like we used to during heat waves when the AC couldn't keep up. We didn't talk about Minsook. Or Silver Pine. Or the months of silence between us. We didn't need to. Dad looked around the garage and said, "You still planning to insulate this place?" I smiled. Eventually. Mom looked at me, her expression soft. "You've done more than we ever could." I shook my head. "You gave me a reason to fight." We stayed until dusk. When they left, I stood in the driveway and watched their taillights fade. It was quiet. Peaceful. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because I wasn't trying to get back what we lost anymore. I was here to build forward. A few weeks after the dust settled, I got an envelope in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It was my house, the way it used to look. Before the paint job. Before the porch was replaced. Before everything changed. I recognized the angle immediately. It was taken from the sidewalk, same spot where I'd stood when I first saw strangers moving boxes into my bedroom. Back when this whole story began. Taped to the corner of the photo was a single note, "Now you know what it costs. Don't forget it. MS." No threats. No legal follow-up. Just a reminder. A quiet acknowledgement from a man who'd built his power on silence, and now had nothing left to take from me. I burned the note. Kept the photo. Framed it. Not as a warning. As a marker. A line between who I was and who I'd become. These days, I don't visit the past as often. I've rebuilt the house. Slowly. With intention. The backyard? We turned it into a community garden. Local kids help out on Saturdays. The guest room? Now an office where I help other families navigate housing law and local ordinances, with a little legal translation help from Natalie. She moved in last month. We didn't make a big deal out of it. We just kept showing up for each other until one day, she brought her plants over and never took them back. We still fight sometimes. But now it's about things that matter. Paint colors. Where the bookshelf should go. Whether or not lumpia belongs in the freezer for emergencies or at all times, no exceptions. She always wins those debates. And me? I finally sleep through the night. Because the house is mine again. Not just on paper. But in the way it feels. It holds me, not because it's unchanged, but because I changed to deserve it. Have you ever had to rebuild not just what you lost, but who you were after losing it? I want to thank you for being here. For listening to this story. For sitting with me in the heartbreak, the fight, and the hope. If this meant something to you, please subscribe, share your own story in the comments, and tell someone you trust. We can take it back. Because we can. One piece at a time. Thank you. For real. And welcome home.